After the Revolutionary War, the United States had a massive amount of debt totaling $11.7 million to foreigners and much more to the citizens. After 12 troubling years of independence, America was unstable. Revenue was declining, while interest on the public debt was proliferating. Individual states created worthless paper currency, and there was a dearth of metallic money. Hamilton took a stand and provided a solution to all of these disastrous problems. Alexander Hamilton wished to pool together all of the state's debts so he could boost the national credit rating to receive loans from countries abroad. He did this through the use of assumption and funding at par.
Funding at par. The government owed many people money because they had helped during the Revolutionary War. Thus, the government supplied bonds to the soldiers and farmers, which acted as an IOU note from the government. Many of these people were soldiers in the war and citizens whom they borrowed supplies from. However, during the first 12 years that the United States stood as a nation, many of the lower class were not able to sustain themselves and had to sell off their debt to speculators. The speculators were people who waited for the government to pay off the debt, a luxury the commoners could not afford. For example, if a southern farmer had a bond worth $500, he might have sold it to a speculator for $50. By the early 1790s, almost all the bonds were sold. Hamilton influenced funding at par to be passed, which meant that the government would pay the bonds issued during the Revolutionary War at face value. This meant that the speculators who obtained multiple bonds benefited from the commoners' need for money, the main objection of the Jeffersonians. This caused the debt of the United States to increase by $42 million. Ultimately, Hamilton's funding at par caused the rich to become even richer and the poor to get angrier at Hamilton's favoring of the wealthy class. The national debt was rising, and the new country had to act fast to be able to succeed.
Assumption. Alexander Hamilton wished to pool together all of the state's debts for a variety of purposes. First, he wanted to boost the national credit rating to receive loans from countries abroad. He also wanted to ensure that the national government would be able to regulate the debt more effectively. Hamilton believed that as a consequence of the Revolution, all states had incurred losses while fighting for independence, but worked as a team, and therefore the debt was a national responsibility. The national debt was not split evenly due to the fact that some states owed more than others. The war had not equally affected each state because some states had funded the war more than others and provided as battlefields. However, Hamilton wanted to unify them into one large national debt that equated to $21.5 million. Not all the states agreed to the national debt, but Hamilton believed that the only people he needed to please were the rich, because the poor were uneducated. Also, the poor would lack the privileges to vote, and would therefore hinder the national bank's progress. States that did not pay all of their debts were supportive of the Assumption Plan. However, there were a few states that did not wish to make all of the states' debts national, such as Virginia. However, Hamilton made a deal with Virginia to place the capital of the nation along the Potomac River. This deal occurred at a dinner hosted by Jefferson when he invited Hamilton and Madison to discuss the assumption of debts and the location of the capital. He and Madison agreed to provide votes for the ratification of the bill through Congress, but as a trade-off, the capital would be located near Virginia. This would also keep the capital in the reach of the South and away from Manhattan, where Hamilton held a lot of power. This appeased the Virginians, who were not happy that the capital was planned to be around New York. But Jefferson would later regret the passing of the national debt because of the loss of states' rights. As a reward for the transition of the capital towards the Potomac, Virginia then supported the ratification of the Assumption Bill, clearing the way for the debt of the nation to coalesce. In 1791, Alexander Hamilton introduced the excise tax. It passed through the House of Representatives with little struggle. It levied a tax on domestic and imported alcohol, and it was an important method to pay off the national debt. Southern and Western farmers widely disapproved of it because the grain crop was an integral ingredient in creating whiskey. A large rebellion followed after several protests and domestic violence against tax collectors and federal revenue officers. Jefferson would not oppose the rebellion because he believed whiskey should not be taxed, and he would later go on to remove the tax as president. He believed it took too much power and money from the people. The Whiskey Rebellion took place in southwestern Pennsylvania, and George Washington's administration sent 13,000 men to diminish the revolt. The rebellion failed, and most of the rebels were pardoned for their crime. As a result of the rebellion, the people trusted the government's military power as capable.
Hamilton also proposed protective tariffs in 1789. Protective tariffs are taxes on imported goods. The main goal of the government was to raise revenue, but it also provided security to the growing national industries. Further increases of tariffs were put off due to fear that it would cause the South to secede. Jefferson opposed the protective tariffs because most of the taxes were used to help the North, at a 5-to-1 ratio. Tariffs remain in modern society.
The National Bank. Alexander Hamilton wanted a national bank to provide the federal government with more power. As a Federalist, he naturally wanted a larger government, but he also wanted more power as Secretary of the Treasury. As well, it would provide appointed support for Assumption because it would serve as a centralized storage for the debt. He also believed that the national bank should be 20% government and 75% private owned. Its charter would last 20 years in Philadelphia. Although many of the Virginians were against the 20-year charter because it would go against the movement of the new capital to the Potomac, Hamilton still introduced the bill. The Bank of the United States would accept deposits, issue banknotes, discount commercial paper, and loan short-term funds to the government. However, Hamilton wanted more. He wanted the government bank to be 5 times the size of any other commercial bank. Last, he wanted the bank to force investors to enter into long-term securities. This would ensure the safety of the newly born nation's economy. After months of debate, the Bank of the United States was passed in February of 1791. In the bill, Congress provided for a capitalization of $10 million. These provisions were not everything Hamilton wished for, but Jefferson was even more disappointed. The bank evolved into the modern-day Federal Reserve. Political parties were created mainly due to sides taken during Hamilton's economic plan. Though it was a feeble resistance, the passing of the plan caused ignition of the people. Hamilton's side formed the Federalists, featuring him and Washington. They supported Hamilton's plan and the wealthy class. Jefferson's side formed the Anti-Federalists, including him and Madison. They disapproved of the economic plan, supporting the agrarian society. Federalists now form modern-day Republicans, while the Anti-Federalists consist of modern-day Democrats. In conclusion, Hamilton's fiscal policies were made to benefit the wealthier class in the hope that they, in return, help the government in its economic and political endeavors. The national credit was the first concern, improving it through funding at par and assumption. Funding at par meant the government paid off the war bonds at face value, while assumption meant the government took on the state debts. Protective tariffs were also passed in an effort to bring in additional revenue and secure growing industrial colonies. Excise taxes were implanted, most notably on whiskey. This tax helped bring in revenue to the government, and the Whiskey Rebellion showed the country's strong army. The Bank of the United States paid off the debt and provided an example for the Federal Reserve. All these conflicts caused a rift in the legislature, forming the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. These were the effects of Hamilton's economic plan.